I'm using this is Bristol paper, which is just kind of has a little bit of a smoother surface, but you could really use anything from sketch paper to drawing paper to construction paper, to watercolor paper, really anything. Just keep in mind, the smoother the paper, the smoother your finish is going to be. Whereas if you have more kind of tooth or more texture in your paper, you might see that more in your finished kind of result with the colored pencil. So that's just something to keep in mind. One's not better than the other, it's just different. But what I'm doing with my tape is I just like to tape off little squares to work within a composition. And I just kind of want to show you how I might set up my paper, in that I might actually do like multiple textures all on one, as almost like a texture study. You could also like just grab a ruler and a pencil or a marker and draw yourself little squares, or maybe you don't want to work in a square. That's fine too. Just for me, it's nice to frame it a little bit. Now I do want to keep them relatively small, so I'll actually zoom in. I do like to keep them relatively small because you know, we're really focusing on detail and color and all that stuff. So we don't want to draw too big. So that's kind of why I like to frame this a little bit smaller. So my size, yeah, it's just over 2.5 by 2.5 basically. And I didn't even measure it. I just kind of taped off a square. The other thing I like to do is sometimes I'll take an extra piece of printer paper or sketch paper, scratch paper that I'll kind of use to cover up areas of where I'm drawing, just so I don't get too smudgy, because colored pencil can still smudge kind of like graphite. So the first thing I'm going to do, and actually I'll zoom out a minute just while I'm picking my colors here. The first thing we're going to do is pick out our colors. Now keep in mind, you're not just going to need green. You're going to probably need multiple greens, maybe some yellow. You might even need, I look at this, and maybe some navy blue kind of for that dark right corner. You could bring black into it. You could even darken some of your green with red if you need to, if you don't have a dark enough green. So that's kind of what I do, is I start by just kind of picking out my colored pencils. Sometimes I'll just keep like a little cup maybe, and whatever colors I'm using, I'll just kind of set aside so I can grab them, because oftentimes when you're kind of doing textures like this, you'll hop back and forth between multiple colors. So, you know, and sometimes I'll just grab even colors I don't know if I'll for sure need, but, you know, maybe could kind of fit along with it. Because the beauty of colored pencil is you can really layer it up. So that's kind of where I start, is just picking any colors that I feel would work. So more greens here. If you feel like, you know, you only have one type of green, keep in mind you can bring yellows into it. Like I said, you can darken with red, because red and green are complementary colors. So if you layer them, they'll a little bit of red will help lower the intensity of the green. Let's see, maybe even a little bit of this brighter blue. Okay. So now I do want to show you this book too. I did show this book in my first color pencil class I did, and I'm linking it on the blog today. But this is 101 textures in colored pencil. And this, I've done projects sort of like what I'm showing you today. And then I found this book after the fact. And I thought it was really cool because they kind of have these little squares too, like I'm showing you. And I thought that was really interesting. But basically, I like this book because it shows us how we're going to be working, in the sense that we're building up gradual layers as we go. So we're starting very, very light with very light pressure, focusing on kind of direction, which I'll talk about with this leaf. We have some beautiful directional lines to work with here. And then we start to build up the value. Now, keep in mind, when we're looking at something, we want to kind of identify where it's dark, where it's light, and kind of those ranges in between. So this book just has a lot of really cool things, like there's leopard fur, fish scales, feather. I do think some of it does kind of a little bit of a drastic jump on some of them, but I still think you get the gist. I think these folds are pretty nice, just to kind of show you that buildup of starting kind of very light with values and darkening. But that's kind of our goal today, is we're going to be starting very light, and then we are going to kind of darken and build up our layers from there. So the first thing I do when I'm drawing with colored pencils, I usually don't bring any graphite into it. I usually just start drawing with the colored pencil itself. So I might just pick, you know, kind of like a medium green to kind of be like my sketch pencil. And then I just make sure it's nice and sharp. And I found my new pencil sharpener in our move, but I bought one of these Prismacolor pencil sharpeners, and it's really, really nice. It's got, you know, the two sizes in the top and just holds everything for you, but this is super, super nice. It sharpens really, really well. That way you get those nice sharp tips. So that's something to keep in mind too, is if, you know, the line you're creating is nice and crisp, make sure your pencil is really crisp. If you have something that's a bit softer, you know, maybe you want to work with a dull pencil, or maybe you want to sharpen with a knife because you can bring out more of the actual color too. So just some things to keep in mind. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of loosely create a sketch, kind of blocking in kind of some of these basic lines that I'm seeing and basic sections. So kind of a line through the middle, and then I'm going to start bringing some lines kind of through the side here. As always, you can determine how realistic you want something to be versus kind of an interpretation of the texture and style based on how much detail you put into it. And what that could mean is you're actually counting little lines, you're measuring things, maybe you're even gridding this off a little bit more to be more accurate. So those are some things you can do if you want to. I tend to like to just be a little bit looser with it. Those of you who've been in my classes are learning that about me. But you know, I just like to say that because I think you can really work in any style you want. Now, keep in mind this kind of early block-in phase is almost going to be like a little elementary, a little basic. It's just very light at this point. But basically, you're just starting to kind of block in shapes you see, block in kind of areas of color. Now, sometimes I'll do things where I'll lay in, like for the really bright area where it's really, really light. For example, you could start to lay in some yellow underneath where that green would go. And then you could start to build up your layers of green. Okay, but putting yellow underneath that green is going to brighten it up a little bit. So you can think about kind of layering colors together to create new colors. But what I try to do is just kind of try to hop around and look at where it's light, look at where it's dark. But this kind of first initial layer is pretty loose. Just kind of keeping it light, making sure my pencil is still sharp. But again, this is why I like that tape, because I can just let my pencil go off the edge, and then when I peel it, it's going to be nice and clean. I can start layering up color. You know, if you have a bigger expanse of color too, you can just kind of shade in kind of an area, almost like when we do washes on paintings. And then there's a couple kind of tricks too for white where you can actually kind of leave areas empty, almost like you're painting with watercolor. Or, you know, I've even seen people bring like gel pens and pull out highlights with like a gel pen if you want to add something and have it be mixed media. Otherwise, if you have an area that's light, kind of what I'm doing right here is I'll just purposefully like leave little spaces for me to then kind of fill back in later. And the other thing you can do too is you can have like a separate piece of paper on the side if you need to test colors and say, you know, does this color work? Or you could even try blending some colors on the side and layering them and then choose your color. I will say I have some students that are just very particular about their colors and what they're using, and they want to test everything out first. If you have a new set of colored pencils and you haven't done some little swatches of all your colors, that can actually be really handy to do. How are those oil pastel or the pastel pencils?
They're really, I think they're colored pencils, but they go on so nicely.
They're like really smooth. They're probably just like super extra nice colored pencil maybe.
Yeah.
You can always take a picture too of the box and send it to me if you want.
Okay.
But I know we'll get into some pastels too. I haven't done any pastel classes yet, but I will be doing some. And I will say pastel pencils are a great option for getting the pastel effect, but still having a lot more control. So you can see too, this is why sometimes small boxes are really nice because, you know, adding adding the texture can take some time for sure. But I think one of the things I didn't realize, at least when I was younger, using colored pencils to when I started using them as more of a fine art medium, is how layering is so important. And by layering, you're truly creating depth and dimension over time. And it takes a while. It takes a while to build that up, but it's worth it because you're going to create some really beautiful textures. And again, you have a range of creating textures that are realistic to stylized to abstract and, you know, honestly everywhere in between, but the process is really the same. Again, realism and striving for that is just making sure the information that you're seeing on the reference image is transferred here. So the lines are the same, the colors are the same, and that takes practice too, because that's the art of observation. So keep in mind, if realism is your goal, you will get there. You will get there over time. And this is too an activity that's always good to step back from because we are very zoomed in, very, very close. And so it's good to step back. So I'm kind of bringing in some darker blue. I don't always like to darken with black right away. I mean, I enjoy using black. I use it a lot in my art, but sometimes I like to layer other colors into it so it's not so flat. Because black tends to flatten things out. It does recede, but sometimes when we add other pops of color, it just can bring a little bit more interest into it. We could warm a black, we could cool a black, we could make it a little bit more unified. So I like to try to repeat my colors and bring them multiple places so things look unified. And that's another reason why I think it's good to pick out your colors ahead of time so you're kind of working with the same ones, even if you don't use them all, versus just kind of a free-for-all, you know, in your pencil box. But again, you could do it that way. Those are just some kind of helpful tips from when I was getting started that I found to work and things that my students have found helpful too. But see, we're just kind of starting to build and layer, and we're going to keep building. We're going to keep layering. You can hop back and forth between your pencils, like I said. The goal, I mean, you kind of want to work lightish color to darkish color, and I say ish because you can hop back and forth, but really what's most important is that light to heavy pressure. If you remember, if you're in the first color pencil class, we talked about how when we do really, really heavy pressure, it smashes the fibers of the paper down, and it's hard to add more color to fibers that have been smashed down. So just keep in mind, you want to build that pressure over time and have it be gradual so that you can have all those beautiful colors to create all that depth. Keep in mind too, warm colors tend to come forward, pop out at you, whereas cool colors tend to recede or go back in space. And we'll talk, you know, I'll have some more classes on color. I've done a couple things on color, but traditionally speaking, we view like red, orange, and yellow as warm, and blue, green, purple as cool, when actuality, all colors could be warm or cool. You could have a cool green or a warm green. You could have a cool red or a warm red. So you can, it's not like you have to have a red foreground to make that come forward. You just have to think about, are you using a warm red or a cool red? And those little kind of tips will just help you. And if you're not sure how to tell if it's warm or cool, think of it this way, like a yellow that's more lemony is going to be like a cool yellow, whereas like a yellow that's got like a little bit of orange or kind of ochre color to it is going to be warmer. And you can also do, that's why swatches can be very helpful, because you can kind of tell if a color's warm or cool. If you put two reds next to each other, you're usually able to tell with your eye. And then I am bringing a little bit of black into this now, just a little bit, to kind of, just to recede some of this value. I want it to go back in space just a little bit. And again, I'm just kind of leaving those little spaces kind of for those light areas. You know, kind of, you can play around with your line style too, because as you're looking at this leaf, you know, keep in mind there's areas where there's kind of really thin lines, and then areas where there's kind of thicker lines. So think about that too. And, you know, it's fun to, I think, just kind of let colors layer on each other a little bit. You know, a little bit more yellow in. Hey.
Something's wrong with my YouTube.
I'm just kind of bringing some more yellow up into the top here, just kind of warming that up a little bit. You know, just kind of some nice kind of flicks with this lighter green. And then eventually, you know, you're going to start building up pressure over time. And it's one of those things you can kind of decide when it's finished too. I think that's, you know, an important thing to note. I think colored pencil, like acrylic painting in a sense, you can kind of keep adding to it, keep adding to it, keep adding to it. But if there gets to be a point where you just like how it looks, you can always stop too. Now, the fun thing too, you can kind of scratch a little bit. So if there's ever like white you kind of want to get rid of, you could always do like a little paper clip. This works even better for oil pastel. It's one thing, texture with oil pastel, you can remove and white can come back. So if you do have pastels, the same activity with pastels, I think is very, very helpful. And you know, sometimes I might have a couple different ones going at once, just in case, you know, I need a break from one, or I want to hop around a little bit. I like to work that way. Yeah, it's just lots and lots and lots of layering and bringing different colors into it. Sometimes, you know, you're using colors you wouldn't even expect. Like for me, I'm like, how could, okay, this green could be a little bit darker, for example. So I'm just gonna bring a little bit of red into it. And then I might layer a little bit more green back over top of that red. And that's gonna darken it for me. And I mean, those itty bitty little lines, those kind of little skinny lines, I mean, really truly, if you look close, they're yellow. I mean, we don't truly have any white in this image at all. They're really, really fine yellow. So you could do like a really, really sharp tip on your color pencil and kind of get those little itty bitty flicks of yellow and doing some yellow lines. And then kind of almost bringing that green up to it just a little bit and overlapping. That way it'll appear nice and kind of skinny too. So that's another thing you can kind of, it's a little tricky to see on my camera. The closer I get, the more kind of pixely my camera gets. But that's kind of another way to achieve more of that realism, is kind of picking out those little things and saying, okay, how could I achieve that texture here? Or what could I do to make this look like that? Those are just kind of the questions I ask myself. And then I'll say, okay, you know, maybe it's mixing these two colors together, or maybe it's I need a really pointy tip on my pencil, or maybe it's I need a dull pencil, or maybe it's I need you know, to blend it with a tortillon or something, or I need to burnish it. So, you know, just examples of different things I kind of consider as I'm going through, because every texture is different. And again, mine here is kind of more loosely based, but I can still kind of start to pull out the areas where I'm seeing it's darker. So that's how we create depth, is through value. Okay, so we want to see lights and darks. Even though there's no pure white here, our lightest area is still that light yellow. And then we've got all these kind of lovely darks kind of through the center of the leaf and kind of on the side, that we want to make sure we do those justice. We want to make sure that we push those nice and dark. The biggest tip I can give any artist ever, for a painting, for a drawing, for anything you might be making, is don't be afraid to push your darks dark. I think it will dramatically just improve your overall drawing. It sends things back and pushes things forward, which then again creates that illusion of space and depth that we're trying to create. Because even something that's kind of stylized based on reality can still have, you know, beautiful value, can still, you know, show depth, even if all our lines aren't perfect and super precise. Because again, it depends on what your individual style is. But I'm just kind of hopping back and forth. I've got some dark umber, I've got some indigo blue, I've got some grass green. This is an apple green. I've just been kind of layering all these colors and just kind of experimenting a little bit. You know, keep in mind too, this is an experiment, this activity, you know, you're trying something out, you're testing something, and then, you know, you could translate these textures later on into a final piece if you wanted to. But I almost think of it as just kind of trying out different ways and methods to do things. Because, I mean, truly, that's kind of what art is about. It's how could I interpret this texture? How could I recreate this shape to show someone what I'm trying to show them? Or so again, just kind of things I think about as I'm working. And I'm just kind of, you know, thinking about little short kind of flicks of lines. You know, sometimes I'll kind of make some initial lines and then we'll worry about continuing those later. The other thing I'll mention is you can add other colors to things. As always, when we use references, we're using them as a starting point unless your goal is hyperrealism and you're trying to copy them exactly how they are. If that's your goal, then of course you're striving for accuracy, right? But if your goal is to just kind of experiment and create your own textures and your own interpretations, because I think that's what art is it's creating your own version of reality and what you want to show someone, then, you know, you can be a little bit looser with it. And, you know, to be honest with you, I think that's why I prefer to draw in a stylized way, because for me, it's just enjoyable, it's expressive, and for me, hyperrealism just takes a really long time. I'll be honest with you, it just takes a super long time because there's so much more detail. And when I kind of am looser, I get to express myself a little bit differently. And to me, that's why I like art. So I think part of it too is finding your purpose and why you like creating. Does it bring you stress relief? Are you trying to improve your skills? You know, do you want to create finished works with colored pencil? If you did, what kinds of subjects would you be interested in? You know, I think animals can be really fun. Nature is awesome. You could try even setting up textures or objects in your own home and trying to recreate them too. That can be really fun. No, honestly, this probably could have been a 3-hour class where we just, it's kind of therapeutic. I don't know, maybe we should have texture Thursdays or something where we get together and we recreate textures and we just kind of show each other what we come up with. I will mention too, if you don't have a white or a colorless blender, you can burnish with light colors too. Just know it's going to bring that kind of tone into this. But almost like if you look at the actual image, is the greens are just this kind of really bright yellow green, right? So sometimes to achieve kind of that brightness factor, burnishing with like a yellow on top of this can kind of help bring some of that kind of glowy, kind of bright color you're looking for too. So you don't always have to burnish just with the colorless or the white. You could try other colors like a light pink, a tan, different yellows can be pretty. It just, again, is depending on what you're drawing and what you're trying to do. But I mean, burnishing with a dark color pencil just wouldn't do anything for you because it just make everything really dark. That's why, you know, you kind of keep it to lighter colors. But, you know, I think challenging yourself to match colors can be pretty fun. That's something I'll often do kind of on the side. The other thing that can be really awesome with colored pencils, and I think dramatically help, is working on toned paper, not white. White, to be honest, isn't doing colored pencils really any favors. It's really not. Gray and tan, to be honest with you, is some of my favorite for colored pencils. It just, the colors pop. You're working on a middle value instead of white, and it can just be really great. And if you have really high quality color pencils, you can actually work on like a really dark gray or black paper too, and you're just getting different effects. And white paper's not bad, it's just, it doesn't do it any particular favors, that's all. Well, we could kind of keep going with this, but I'm wondering maybe we should try just kind of getting started on another one, just kind of for variation, since I've got about 15 minutes left or so. But I am just taking a little bit of my blender because I just kind of want to show you kind of what it starts to look like when you kind of start blending. And I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. There we go. So I think sometimes when you're so close to something, so don't be afraid to step back from yours as well. You know, set it back, step away from it, look at the reference photo. Again, assess what your goals are, and then you can kind of add to it, change it. One really awesome thing I highly recommend everybody pick up is this. This is called Workable Fixative. This, couple things it can do for you. One, it protects pencil, pastel, and chalk drawings from making them smudge when you're done. But two, let's say you smash all your fibers down, okay? And you're like, shoot, I really need other colors here, but I smashed them all down. You can actually spray this on to your colored pencil, and it actually helps bring some of the tooth back a little bit for you to add more color. So this is workable fixative. You know, it's just like a aerosol can, like spray paint. This is Krylon, but other brands make it too, but I highly recommend having this. It's really good for all of your drawing stuff, and one can will last you a really long time. I think it's like $6 or $7 maybe, but definitely worth it. But that is one kind of tip you can do if you find you've gotten to a point where you pressed too hard and you didn't mean to, can save you a little bit. Just to kind of show you, you can just kind of blend, and you know, I can kind of assess this to the final picture a little bit and say, well, yeah, I could bring some light back through here if I want to. I can kind of work in those dark lines here. So you can just kind of keep working it until you get to a point where you're satisfied with it. Let's go ahead, we can try another one, or at least start another one. I'll just kind of scroll through them, and if someone wants to tell me which one looks good to them, I mean, we just did a leaf, so maybe we don't want other leaves. We could try like the bark, like this. Do this one. Succulent. Bricks and rocks. This is, I think, it's kind of like bark or like a rock, kind of hard to tell.
Looks like a rock.
A rock, yeah, looks like a rock. I think you're right. Wood. That one's so pretty too. The drop. Fur.
How about that one?
The fur? The leopard?
Leopard, yes.
Leopard? Yeah, sure. Let's do it. I love it. Okay. So is everyone doing okay with being able to toggle back and forth between the picture and the, has that been going okay, hopefully, for everyone? So first things first, go ahead and just kind of take a minute with the reference photo and just start pulling aside the colors that you see. If you've got some kind of tan, that might be good for drawing. Take that off. So, you know, maybe like some of these colors, definitely black. Maybe some red, kind of warm up the brown a little bit, maybe. Some oranges. I'm just getting rid of the colors I'm not using so I don't. So again, that's just something I like to do, just separate my colors. So I just get these little, you know, from Target, they're like $1, the little container, and I just kind of set them to the side. So first things first is I would just kind of pick a neutral color, could be sort of tannish or brownish, depending on what you have. And we are just going to kind of loosely draw the spots in to kind of start with this one. So this one I approach a little bit different than the leaf, where I just kind of started to draw lines, where I'm gonna just kind of loosely, you know, it's like dark here in this corner. And again, you decide how specific and accurate you want to be versus how kind of based on it, stylized, loosely based you want to be. But either way, you're going to just start off with some kind of loose shapes. This one, fur, you know, think about how would you kind of, you know, flick your pencil out to create some of those kind of lines. It's going to be kind of a lot of layering of that. And again, gridding this out can be helpful if proportions aren't your strong suit. And again, when I think of animals in nature, it's all organic and loose anyway, so that's kind of my approach. I'm just, yeah, mine's not identical. Just kind of, you know, getting some of those prominent shapes in there. Here. Cool. So then what you can do is I'm actually just going to kind of block in just very lightly, putting kind of like a light layer of black. Just kind of block that in. I'm just kind of scumbling a little bit, doing my pencil in more of a circular motion as to not see so many of the directional lines. And it's nice because I can just kind of keep it soft. I'm not totally filling this in yet, but I'm just kind of blocking in some of that color lightly. So we're going to, because depending on how far we get on this today, this could always be a little challenge. You could finish it on your own and then send in a picture too. But you know, the biggest thing I think with learning things like this is really the process. Because no matter what you're drawing, if you've never drawn it before, you're going to have a learning curve. And also, if you do it a second time, it's always going to be better than the first time. I mean, that's just me too. You know, I don't draw cheetahs all the time, right? Or leopards or with the spots. And so, you know, even for me, I'm thinking, okay, well, I got to troubleshoot this or problem solve this a little bit. How might I interpret this texture? But then you kind of think back on the process of how to do it, the skills you've learned, and that's when you get to start figuring it out. So keep that in mind. I feel like art, you never stop learning. You're always going to discover new things. You're always going to run into things you weren't expecting. But that's just the beauty of it. And I think if you can kind of lean into that process and enjoy the experimentation a little bit, like you're just going to have so much fun with it, because so many fun things can happen. And, you know, like Bob Ross always says, right, our happy accidents and mistakes and all that can lead to something really, really cool. So just keep in mind, lots and lots of practice. And, you know, you could even do a little challenge where you try one texture a day, or, you know, one texture a week, depending on your time and your schedule that you have. But guarantee the more textures you try, the more you repeat this process, the easier it's going to get, the better you're going to get. And you're just going to get better at kind of problem solving, meaning knowing what kind of line to use to get a certain look. Like, do I scumble? Do I crosshatch? You're just going to start figuring all that out. So after I kind of block in something like this, I think about that background now, and that kind of fur. I want to sort of, I'm not going to scumble the background because I want to start to suggest some of that fur a little bit. So I have some kind of different browns and tans. Actually, I don't want to go too dark too fast. So I'm going to pull out, I've got like a yellow ochre color. This kind of, it's like a darkish yellowy color. A tannish color could work too. But what I'm going to do is start with that, because remember, it's always better to start lighter. You can always bring dark into it. You can always go back and forth a little bit. But once you put that dark color down, it's hard to get rid of that. So I'm starting with kind of something lighter, and I sharpened it, and it might be a little light at first to see, but I'm just going to kind of start doing some little kind of strokes, and I'm noticing the direction of the fur. I'm paying attention to the direction. So even if you're stylizing something, this is key, okay? Because even stylization is based on reality. It's based on what's actually happening. So you want it to look intentional. So little kind of lines like that, playing around with how sharp your pencil is. Perhaps you want some dull lines kind of juxtaposed with some kind of sharper lines. That can be really interesting to have contrast. And then, you know, perhaps you start layering some other colors, similar colors, and sort of overlapping those strokes. Now, this is an example where like gray paper might be so beautiful because that kind of tone would pop through underneath. But you know, this white you can totally make work. And white does give you the freedom of brightening things in a different way too. So I don't want to hate all on the white paper. There's good things about it too. But if I just kind of repeat this process, and, you know, I'll just kind of start layering in other colors, and then just kind of paying attention to some of the kind of overlap of how some of the fur kind of overlaps over top of some of the kind of dark or black areas. And then you can, as always, you can blend if you want to. You can bring white into it if you want to and burnish it. You could try the tortillon or the blending stump. But as you start to build up, I'm just kind of working in a small area just because of our time, but the more you start to kind of build up these lines, and then eventually, of course, I would start to darken this too, to kind of show, you know, that contrast a little bit. And, you know, you could bring a little brown into this, kind of warm that a little bit. But again, you're working from that really, really light to pushing it really, really dark over time. Yeah, we might have to do like textures 2.0 and 3.0 because there's so much we can do. That's really just